Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm Johnny Rezvani, Director of Communications for 475 High Performance Building Supply. We're very excited to bring you today's presentation, How to Install High Performance Windows. I want to introduce our speaker today. We're joined by my colleague of 8 years, Nick Shaw, who is a FIA certified builder and consultant with many years of experience in the field. And Nick is fantastic to work with and is 475 Senior Product Consultant, our go-to expert on the finer details of high performance installation means and methods. So, Nick, you can take it away.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Starting off, I like to highlight my Dada hammer. That's what we're showing here. Dada was an absurdist art movement. And I bring this up because high performance is a holistic approach. And we're about to talk about things in a very reductive manner. But we need to keep that holistic approach in mind throughout all of this. So this hammer has all the right components. They were just arranged incorrectly. And now the hammer doesn't function as a hammer. And so when we're installing windows or looking at wall and roof assemblies, foundation assemblies, we need to ensure that we're staying watertight as the #1 priority. That's why we went into caves to begin with. Everything will fail if there's a bulk water leak. We're next prioritizing air tightness. We're then thinking about how things are going to dry through diffusion, i.e. the vapor control, and then lastly, the thermal value or the R value, the thermal control of the assembly. And we ask all of this out of our windows. Our windows are our waterproofing. We got to connect our air barriers to them properly. They're going to be vapor closed, but we're having a high temperature differential where we're installing them. So we want to make sure that that dries through diffusion. And then we also want good thermal value out of our windows, i.e. a low U value. And a big part of that low U value is that when we have a double pane, a higher U value unit, that creates a colder interior surface temperature. That can be a place for condensation. That's how we get the sweating on our windows. If we think about having your soda can out in a summer day, we have all that condensation, that sweating. That's just the warm air meeting the cold surface. So in the winter time, it's warm inside, it's cold out. We need a high performance window unit so that way that interior surface temperature of the window is a comfortable temperature. We want to be that as warm as possible. So that will help reduce any condensation, but also that cold temperature could suck the heat off of your body and make you feel uncomfortable, even if it's a comfortable temperature within the room. So for climate zones 4 and up, this means you really need to be prioritizing triple pane windows. For climate zones 3 and below, you could get away with double pane, especially if it's a larger multifamily project or something like that. But in general, nowadays, we're typically using triple pane units. I won't be delving too much into like specific manufacturers or things like that. This is all more about how to install that unit instead of the actual unit itself. And here, this is just kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So on the left side, we're showing how to prep that rough opening. The blue line upward of that sheathing, that is our house wrap, our water resistant barrier, and might be your only air barrier as well. You see this red line coming across on the horizontal and over a little piece of wood. That's our Sill Protection tape, the Extoseal Encores tape. So one of our few vapor closed tapes that we're using. Because again, there's a high temperature differential where we're setting this window unit down and there might be condensation that occurs there. So we want to have that condensation stay on top of this sill tape, the Extoseal Encores, and then ideally drain out or dry through diffusion. So then in the middle, we set our window unit in the rough opening. And you see that there are these kind of magenta color tapes. That is us taping to the actual window frame. On the interior side, we're air sealing to the window frame. On the exterior side, we're waterproofing. we're pressing the window sill up against this back dam. That's just a little piece of wood. And I'm typically seeing folks just rip a piece of plywood to install right there, but that's just creating a little stop. Old metal pans that folks used to use, they had that lip on the interior. And we're moving away from metal because of the thermal bridge concerns. That metal is very conductive and could increase the amount of condensation, but we're doing a similar approach with the tape. And then on the right, we're showing the more completed wall assembly. We have our exterior insulation. We have our rain screen that is vented and allowing drainage, and then a metal pan that's installed to the exterior side of the sill and will shed any water outboard of the siding. So this is just kind of like an overview of what we'll be talking about today. There's different ways to seal to your actual window units. On the left, we're showing a double-sided tape, or what we call a zero reveal tape. This is a tape that has a split release backing on the face of it. So you can tape that to the window frame and then get the rest of it to your actual air barrier or waterproofing. This is a really great approach, but it does require you to set the window unit down on a sawhorse and pre-tape it before you set it into the rough opening. A lot of these triple pane units can be really heavy and hard to maneuver around the job site. So that is one caveat to this approach. You do need to literally set it down on a sawhorse and pre-tape it before you set the unit in place. Then we're showing face taping. This is the main approach where we're getting a tape connection from the WRB on the exterior directly to the window frame and from the air barrier on the interior directly to the window frame. What's really nice about this approach is that it's easy to visually inspect and play quality control. Then we're showing like a backer rod and caulk approach. This does work well, but the caulk will probably need to be touched up over time. A lot of these caulks tend to harden and get brittle and can crack. And so there's a lot of like durability and longevity issues with this approach. It's much more common for multifamily projects or high-rise projects. And then on the furthest right, we're showing a flange unit or windows with a nailing fin. And that on the exterior, we're just taping to that actual flange, to that nailing fin, but still getting our air barrier connection on the interior side. We want to waterproof on the exterior and air seal on the interior side. So we have our wall sheathed, and then we typically run the house wrap across that rough opening. Here we're showing the Mento 1000 membrane. This is one that you install with staples and then you tape the seams. But it could also be the Adhero membrane that you'll see in some photos. This is the Adhero 3000. It's a darker blue membrane currently. That one is fully adhered. It's like a giant piece of tape. So that one sticks to the actual plywood substrate or OSB or masonry sheathing, whatever it might be. And the big advantage of the Adhero membrane is that it self-seals around fastener penetrations. And when we talk about self-sealing, that's in terms of waterproofing. The Mento, the staples will stay airtight because it's pinching that membrane. But then if you were to fasten a screw directly through it, you could have water that sits on that screw and works its way inside. So the Adhero would stop that and waterproof that fastener penetration. So that's a big advantage of using the Solitex Adhero 3000 membrane. And here we're showing what folks call the hourglass or the martini shape that you cut out of the WRB. On the left, you can see this image from our flange window install guide, or on the middle and right, you're seeing the backside of the Adhero membrane, the backside of the peel and stick membrane. And so what we're doing here is we're cutting it to be able to create that opening, but then also having floppy bits of the membrane to turn into that rough opening. The big advantage of this is that a lot of projects only have one air barrier, the house wrap at the sheathing. And so this way, if you turn it into the rough opening and patch in at the corners, you can still get an interior window tape, an interior air seal to your windows. So you're turning that exterior air barrier, your waterproofing, into the rough opening to get an interior air seal. And when we cut this shape, there will be little corners and things that we need to patch. So that's what's showing here, is that they're just using some scrap pieces of the adhero. You can see that the header is kind of being held off while they place in this little scrap piece at the corner, and then this adhero folds in. That way we're still shiplapping seams. But there is a concern at this little corner. This tends to be a weak point where we might have a little hole in that connection. And so this hole is a concern, and there's something called bow tie taping. That's what we're showing on the right here. It's called bow tie taping because it looks like a little bow tie. And the little center of this bow tie tape goes over that hole. And the shape of this tape allows you to conform it nicely into that corner. So that way you don't have any leak potential at that corner. So that's what we're showing here. And then we're also oftentimes doing a little extra perpendicular piece of tape just to prevent any loose edges of that bow tie tape from flipping up or anything like that. So here we're showing two different installs. On the left, they brought that adhero into the rough opening, and then they used the bow tie tape and then taped over with the Tescon Vanna tape. On the right, this window unit was actually cut out, so there wasn't floppy bits of that adhero to turn in. So instead, the Tescon Vanna tape is being used to bring that exterior air barrier into the rough opening to allow an interior air seal to the actual window unit. Again, we're air sealing on the interior side, we're waterproofing on the exterior side. So now that we've prepped that rough opening, we're now protecting the sill. This is where the ExtoSeal Encores tape comes into play. This is our Sill Protection tape. It's a vapor close tape. It's an acrylic butyl mix adhesive, which partially means that's quite stretchy. And we like the stretchiness for getting into this little corner area here. So as we're installing it, we do bring it up the jambs about 4 to 6 inches, and then we stretch it into that corner. Here we have some different photos showing different options for back damming. I like how the Encores is covering over that back dam. Here, that back dam's happening more out here. That's because this window unit is brought out more in line with the exterior sheathing. But it's nice to have that little lip that you're then pressing the window unit up against when you're installing it. And then any condensation that occurs can't drain inwards. There's a little lip that will force that condensation towards the exterior. Another approach is just sloping your sills, which is fantastic. That's a really great approach that can be sometimes difficult to work the slope into that actual sill. I've seen folks put that sill on little shims, or maybe they're mitering a piece of wood to create that slope. But that's a great approach, but can be a little more fussy and nitpicky in terms of that actual install. Here on the left, we show a really deep sill that also has these extra little legs. We're covering all of that with the ExtoSeal Encores. It's really used for any horizontal surfaces where we could have standing water. That's where we want to be vapor closed. And then on the right, we're showing a door install. And the main difference for doors is just we're bringing that sill protection, that ExtoSeal Encores further up the jambs to help prevent any backsplash issues, to give them a little extra protection there. So the ExtoSeal Encores is installed before you set your actual window units down, which is just important in terms of your project management, ensuring that they have the sill protection tape on site at the appropriate time, which will be before your windows arrive when they're actually prepping the rough opening. So at the jambs, we're bringing that air barrier into the rough opening. That could be a floppy bit from you cutting out that hourglass or martini shape, or it could be using a wider Tescon Vanna to bring that into the rough opening. And I like to overlap the Encores just a little bit with that jamb, but then I prefer to do a perpendicular or horizontal piece of Tesconbana just to seal up all of those edges, just to make sure there's not a little bit of tape that's not fully adhered that will lift up over time. Again, we're trying to air seal this rough opening so that we can get an interior air connection from that air barrier to our window. And this is what it looks like all complete. We see the roll of Tesconbana tape. We see the knife that was used to cut it, that extra seal encores covering the sill. And now we're ready to actually install and place our window units into the rough opening. Window butts can be a little problematic because now we need to protect the header. So we're actually creating a little sill at this header because that's a horizontal surface that could have standing water there. So we're protecting the window butt header with that Extoseal Encores tape, with that sill protection tape. That is a horizontal sill where we could have bulk water pooling right there. It's great if that can be a little slope towards the exterior as well to help promote that to drain. And on this right image, you can also see how they're using tape to turn this air barrier into that rough opening to later on get an interior tape connection to the actual window frame itself. So window bucks, we have a different consideration at the header because that is a little sill. Here we're showing someone prepping this window buck by using OSB. They're taping the different seam connections. OSB is not manufactured to be airtight. It tends to be if it's thick enough, but this falls more in line with like the pretty good house approach. If you're doing more like a passive house certified project, it's really best to use materials that are manufactured to be airtight, just to reduce that risk. For plywood, I would also encourage taping over the end grain of plywood or the actual plies, because you can have air movement through those plies. It also tends to be good to use a higher grade plywood that won't have as many biscuits, because those biscuits could be another source of an air leak. But this is showing another approach for a window buck where they're doing it all with OSB in this case. And what's key is that they're taping all of the seams with that OSB. This is showing an I-joist approach. This is a wood-framed outrigger that then is used to hold the exterior Solitex Mento Plus membrane. The Mento Plus is a house wrap that has netting built in to support dense packed cellulose. So that membrane's installed and then they blow cellulose or other types of fibrous insulation behind that membrane. Here, I don't really worry about the top side of this buck header because actually my house wrap is going to be all on the exterior of that. So, you know, I'm worried about maybe some rain while the building's under construction. But once that Mento is installed, now our house wrap is in line with the drainage plane, which is all outboard of this I-joist outrigger. For new construction, we call it an I-joist assembly. You can see our ebooks for that. But also for renovations, they tend to be called Larson trusses, where folks are building what's called a Larson truss, which tends to be a 2x piece of wood with a little flange coming off it made out of plywood, where then they screw that into the sheathing. What's really nice about this approach is you're doing all exterior insulation, but all vapor permeable fibrous insulation, such as dense packed cellulose. So it's a really good option for retrofits or renovations. Where we want to locate the window within the rough opening depends on where our insulation is. So ideally, it's in the middle of our insulation. A lot of folks talk about this as belly buttons because it's cute. We don't want a true outie. We don't want a window unit all the way on the exterior side because then we have a diagonal thermal bridge. Same concern with a true innie, where it's brought all the way towards the interior side near the drywall. Now we have another diagonal thermal bridge. Ideally, it's in the middle of your insulation. This is the best way to get the best thermal performance to really reduce or eliminate any thermal bridging. So you want to locate your window unit in the middle of your insulation. There are high density EPS thermal buck products. So this is a high density EPS that is structural enough to hang your window on, and it's a way to bring your window out in line with exterior insulation. So here you can see that they're holding the Solitex Hero 3000 membrane off of that for the install, but then all of those flaps would be brought down to lap and wrap around the thermal buck product. They're holding it off at the header so that way they can shiplap over the header frame there. But here you can see how this project will have exterior insulation installed. So they're using the thermal buck product to bring where they're going to locate that window unit out in the middle of that exterior insulation. And then they're actually sealing to the window unit using the Contiga Solido IQ tape. This is a fleecy tape. It comes in quite a bit wide widths, which is nice for if you need to bridge large areas. And at the header, unfortunately, you can't quite see it. There is the ExtraSeal on-course tape, the Sill Protection tape at that header. Again, because that's a horizontal surface where we could have standing water. You can also see a little bit of the ExtraSeal on-course tape sticking out at that sill. We want to overlap that on-course tape about an inch over the house wrap. We don't want to bring it too far down because we don't want to vapor dam at that high temperature differential, but we want to get enough so that any water is shedding and draining away. If you can, it's great to insulate over your actual window frame. This can be more difficult though. So if you're able to, you can run mineral wool or something like that to just cover that window frame and get a better thermal performance out of that connection point. So if you have the opportunity, this is a great approach, but it tends to be a little rarer in terms of your wiggle room of that window frame and how much space you can cover right there. This is the Tescon Profil tape. This is a split release backing. It's used on both the interior and exterior. It's 2 3/8 of an inch wide. And on the product image, you can see how there are actually multiple release strips. So what that means is you can pull the small one and get that lined up directly against your window frame. So that way you're only overlapping that window frame 1/2 of an inch. 1/2 inch is a good amount of overlap to get a strong waterproofing and air seal connection, but also small enough that you can conceal it with a piece of trim or something so that way you won't see that tape down the line. These tapes are incredibly strong. They require pressure activation for the adhesive to set. And once you push down on it using this press fix, which is what's shown in the image on the left here, that adhesive really will not let go. So you don't want to tape to the frame that will be exposed. You want to be able to conceal that tape on all sides so that way you won't have some tape that you see in your finished product there. So 1/2 inch is enough to get that good air seal and waterproofing connection, and also small enough that you're still able to conceal it with a piece of trim or drywall or something like that. So this is the Tescon Profil tape. That split release backing is incredibly helpful. It really reduces the labor that's needed for installing this. It is the same adhesive and things as the Tescon Vanna tape, the tape that's used on membrane seams, such as the Mento 1000 seams or the Intello Plus seams. So you can be futzing with that tape to be using it in the same application, but that's just a little bit more labor for your installer. So we tend to prefer Tescon Profil tape for any corner or like edge details, such as installing a window. Can be used on the interior and exterior. The other main window tapes that we offer is Contiga Solido IQ or Contiga Solido IQD. These come in a wider variety of widths, and this tape doesn't need primer for adhering to masonry. I really like it for our wall to foundation connection, but the primary use is a window tape. So again, it has that split release backing where we can get that 1/2 inch grab to the actual window frame, and then the rest of that adhesive to our waterproofing or air barrier. And then the double-sided version that we're showing on the bottom has an additional adhesive strip on the top of the tape. So this is for that zero reveal taping, or where you pre-install the window tape before you set the window in its actual unit, in its rough opening. So here you can see some of the release strip that hasn't been pulled yet. These windows were pre-taped before they were set into the actual rough opening. You can see the Extoseal Encore showing at the sill there, but it's a really nice approach. But again, you do need to set it down on a sawhorse, and that can be just difficult for maneuvering the window units on the job site. In the lower left, we're showing how we're taping both on the interior and exterior sides. We're kind of pinching the tape on the corners, running a little bit past to ensure we're not having an air leak there. And then we're just using regular painter's tape to just hold it out of the way while we maneuver the window unit into the rough opening. So this is a great approach. But again, it can be just difficult to take your window unit and lay it down on a sawhorse and pre-tape it. But if you have that opportunity, it's making it so you're doing this detail connection before it's set in the rough opening, and it could be possibly harder to access those corners and things like that. So we've waterproofed that sill, and we're actually taping to the sill from the window frame to our house wrap. And a lot of these high performance windows have weep holes. That's what we're showing circled in red here, where you can kind of see them on the far sides on the image of the right. We don't want to block those weep holes. We want to allow drainage or weepage there. And on the right image, you can see how there will be a metal pan that will cover that sill and offer the final finish and waterproofing for that sill. It's nice if you can fasten through a bit of adhesive when you're installing that pan. Might not be necessary. That's kind of like above and beyond, but we are fastening into our waterproofing layer. So it's nice if we can fasten through some adhesive to ensure that water's sitting on that fastener, it's not coming in. But these metal pans tend to have a bit of a pitch to help promote drainage towards the exterior. They also have little lips at the jambs to prevent that water from draining out the sides. That's what you can see on this image on the left. Again, we're just promoting drainage, promoting shedding the water to the exterior side of our finish. So here, this is a stucco finish, and that pan is adequately draining outboard of all this assembly. Window fins or nailing flanges. A lot of those units tend to be lower performing and tend to have more of a condensation issue, or possibly even a bulk water leak issue. So if you have those concerns, if you're worried about bulk water intrusion, then don't tape the windowsill. Allow weepage or drainage there. You will still be getting an interior air sealing tape to the actual window frame, but it's okay to not tape this exterior flange or at the sill. 475, we're comfortable recommending that for high performance window units where we shouldn't have much condensation, and then we can really air seal and waterproof that location to prevent any of that outside air from getting in and possibly condensing there. So this is kind of like depends on what level you value and spacer and how comfortable the window manufacturer is with this type of install. So this is kind of more of a case-by-case basis. I've seen folks make cases in either way, but either way, we still want to get that air seal connection on the interior side. So make sure you're bringing that exterior house wrap, that air barrier into the rough opening to get an interior air seal with the Tescon Profil or the Solido IQ tape. At the headers, we can use the Contiga Solido IQ-D to create a shiplap connection there. So that way we're overlapping our seams properly. So this is a double-sided tape. It's applied to the window frame at the base here, and then we bring it up and peel this double-sided release strip to then fold this Mento membrane down and press in to activate that adhesive and pressure activate it. So this is a way for us to shiplap all of these joints. Then we just get a little extra piece of tape to ensure we're not having a little air leak at this little corner, a little water intrusion at this corner. This is a great approach to be able to shiplap all these corners and everything. But the concern with this is now you're not turning that header into the rough opening for an interior air seal. So you should really only be doing this when you're utilizing a true interior air barrier, such as the Intello Plus membrane. That way you're bringing that up to your window frame and getting a tape connection on the interior side for your actual air seal to the window unit. So again, we're waterproofing on the exterior and we're air sealing on the interior side. And here we're showing doing a similar idea just with a wider piece of tape. The adhero was cut out, it wasn't turned in, we just turned it in with some Tescon Vanna tape, and we didn't have a flap, a loose bit of the membrane to shiplap over that header flange. So instead, we just used a wider piece of tape there. This is using the Tescon Vanna 100, which is a 4-inch wide tape. So I'm lapping up about 3 inches up the Solitex adhero membrane and getting about an inch grab onto that nailing fin or the flange of the actual window unit. And you see that we're taping the sill, then jambs, and then header. So that way all those connections are shiplap to promote drainage there. Here we're showing a similar thing with Tescon Profil. These units actually have a bit of a buck coming out. It looks like just a thin piece of plywood. You can see that they're using a metal pan at the header to help protect that horizontal sill there. And they're bringing that Solitex adhero membrane around that fin, around the buck that's made out of plywood into that rough opening. And then they're taping from the window frame to this adhero using the Tescon Profil tape. Again, you can use this on the interior or exterior sides of your window units. Here's a little bit of a messier job site, but we're doing the same idea. At the header, we're shiplapping those joints to help promote any drainage there, and we're getting a strong connection to the actual window frame with the Tescon Profil tape. So these corners tend to be, more of a waterproofing concern. So it's nice to have something that, is easy to visually inspect. And we can see that these tapes are overlapping plenty. If you were to tug on it, it shouldn't release, it's fully adhered. So this is just like as we're doing quality control, as we're installing things. Here we're showing that double-sided tape where the window is set in place. It's actually already pre-taped. They then stuffed, in this case, mineral wool, but some type of fibrous vapor permeable insulation around that rough opening. And then this tape would be folded out to tape to the house wrap here for starting with the jambs and then the header. So that way we're still shiplapping those joints. Same thing on the interior side, which is what we're showing on the right here. But I would want to make sure that we're taping the seam. We want to make sure that we're air sealing whatever buck or rough opening that we're setting it into. So I'd want to see a seam tape connection here. Mineral wool can be used to stuff around window rough openings. I've seen folks like tuck point cellulose, but I prefer insulation that can be installed at a very low density, because it's hard to play quality control to ensure that when we're tuck pointing this type of insulation, that it's being kept at the right density. So a lot of projects are turning towards the Havelock sheep's wool insulation. And you can purchase just a single bag of their loose fill and then tuck point around your windows and door rough openings to insulate around that. We really want to be avoiding vapor closed insulation, i.e. the can foam, the great stuff type of product. That material is a vapor retarder, and it's also hydrophobic, so it can't safely hold any moisture, and we tend to get condensation against that. It's also not a good air seal. The materials around it will be moving, wood's expanding and contracting based on its moisture content. So we want to rely on our tapes that can kind of flex and move as that building settles and will stay airtight and watertight instead of relying on a can foam that will stay dimensionally stable, but the things around it won't. And that's how we get cracks and voids where we have a high temperature differential and also this hydrophobic vapor retarding insulation that could be trapping moisture. So we want to be vapor permeable using vapor permeable insulation and air sealing and waterproofing with tapes. Here we're just showing a Contiga Solido IQ tape. This window's kind of brought a little bit in. There's probably a fair amount of interior insulation, but we can see the adhero turning into this rough opening. There's kind of a mess of Tescon Vanna tape to help seal that outer edge corner, and then they're taping to the actual window frame using the Contiga Solido IQ tape. This tape comes in a variety of widths. Again, you have to pressure activate the adhesive. Once you do that, it is really not coming off. Airtight, watertight, vapor permeable. We're waterproofing on the exterior. We're air sealing on the interior. Here we're showing the same idea, just using a bunch of Tescon Vanna. Again, a little more futzy since it doesn't have that split release backing, but we're still shiplapping at the jamb to sill. We're promoting drainage there. As long as there's no fish mouths and this is fully adhered, this approach does work well. I just get a little bit worried when we have so many tapes overlapping and things like that of just plain quality control. That can be a little bit more difficult when you're looking at a mess of tape. It's nice if you have just nice straight lines that are fully adhered, no fish mouths, no folds in the actual tape. That could be an air leak or a water leak. Here we're showing the Intello membrane, the interior air barrier. This is also oftentimes our vapor control layer since it's a vapor variable membrane, but we see how that's turning into the rough opening. They're using the Tescon Vanna tape to air seal to the actual window frame. And this is an approach and it's a really great option. Now we don't need to bring that exterior waterproofing into that rough opening as much. We're really just focusing on waterproofing on the exterior, air sealing on the interior. So if you have the Intello, then the prepping that rough opening, you have some more forgiveness since you're bringing that Intello directly up to the window frame to get a tape connection there. I'm less worried about shiplapping joints for an interior air seal. There's no waterproofing happening on the interior side. So we're really just needing the strong adhesive in terms of an air seal connection. And this is a great approach. Just more images of this. Exterior on the left showing the Mento membrane. You can see the strapping to create that rain screen. I'd want to make sure that there's, maybe some drainage or a pan, some type of flashing at the header because we don't want to have horizontal boards in line with our drainage plane. If it's horizontal right there, it's not promoting drainage or venting. So we want to make sure that those headers can still drain and vent adequately. But that's creating that drainage plane, what we call a rain screen, so that those furring strips will hold the siding. They're taping on the exterior with the Tescon Profil from that window frame to the Solitex Mento Plus membrane that has dense packed cellulose behind it. And on this image on the right, we see the Intello turning all the way in and taping to this Schuko unit with the Tescon Profil. There's a little seam of the Intello membrane here, so they're taking that seam. Oftentimes, you're doing some origami with the Intello to turn it into that rough opening. So any of those cuts that you're making, totally fine to cut it, just tape over it. So this is a great approach using the Tescon Vanna for flat taping, where both things you're taping to are in the same plane, but once we're taping an edge or a corner, the Tescon Profil becomes much easier. So same type of technology. Again, it just has that split release backing to ease the install for that. Went the wrong way there. So most of taping to your windows will be a nice straight tape connection. It's only at the corners where we have to do a little bit of tape origami. So this is where we're cutting the little release strip, whether it's the Tescon Vanna, a little edge of it, or the Tescon Profil. and then folding it over so it adheres to itself and it fits in this little corner. For projects, I like to just have one person that they go around and just do all these corners. They're a higher risk location. We want a little bit more of a cautious hand that's doing it. We want to make sure we're pressure activating that tape. But then for the tape running across that sill or jamb or header, we can just overlap this corner tape. I wouldn't try and run that tape continuously all the way around. That will just get hard for this detailed corner to be able to fold it properly at that location. So I strongly encourage just first set these corners, and then you're running straight lines of tape to bring it to this corner connection. And 475, we have a great little guide and video on YouTube showing how to do this small amount of tape origami. But with the Tescon profile, you're just cutting where one of the release strip is happening. You're folding it over, pulling it so it adheres to itself at this little corner, and then you're placing it into the correct location, interior or exterior. And yeah, I would just start off on doing these corners and then come back and tape the rest of it, and you overlap this corner tape. Really keeps things a lot more simple, and these corners are higher risk points. Let's make sure we're paying attention to them appropriately. Changing to a different type of construction, talking about historic masonry, where we have oftentimes a 3-white brick as our structure. And for a lot of historic or landmark projects, we can't insulate or really do anything on the exterior. So we're air sealing all on the interior side, we're insulating all on the interior side. We're oftentimes treating the interior side of this masonry with a fluid applied, such as the Viscon. And then we're also oftentimes having the Intello membrane on the furthest interior side of that insulation. This Intello becomes really key for these old historic assemblies since there isn't any exterior insulation. We can get a strong interior tape connection with that Tescon profile to that Intello membrane. This is our primary air barrier connection. And for the sills, there's oftentimes an exposed stone sill that you can't conceal a tape with. So if you can't conceal that tape, we're typically relying on a caulk joint for the sill. Someone might need to touch up that caulk joint over time. Maybe you have an old stone sill, but it's not landmark or historic status, so you could put a metal pan over that to conceal the tape. But if it's an exposed stone sill that you need to leave exposed, we are just doing a caulk connection at that sill. For the jambs and headers, we can oftentimes conceal that tape connection with a brick mold or some type of trim that will then kind of match our finished facade. So we are oftentimes able to still tape to the window frame to that masonry with that brick mold. And that's where the Contiga Solido IQ tape becomes more key, because that tape doesn't need primer to adhere to masonry. If you're using the Tescon Vanna or the Profil, you would either need the primer or the Viscon to be able to adhere to that masonry more porous substrate, while the IQ tape doesn't need that primer. What's also really nice is that IQ tape has a fleece backing, which is designed to hold a plaster. So it can be really helpful if you're doing a finish stucco assembly on the exterior, or maybe you're doing a lime plaster or clay plaster finish on the interior. So that way you can bring that plaster and actually plaster over that tape and not need as much trim or something to kind of conceal that connection. So the Contiga Solido IQ tape becomes really much more key for plaster or whenever you're adhering to masonry substrates, such as brick or CMU. Looking at multifamily projects or commercial construction, our job sites can be really rough. So this is a CMU wall. They had an exterior EFA system, I believe, and their waterproofing was this liquid applied gold product here, kind of yellow. So they turned that into the rough opening. But their masonry screws and these straps tend to not be all that flush, and this edge could actually tear the tape. they're stuffing a bunch of backer rod and plastic shims to help fill in this rough opening gap. They're using a metal stopper, a little metal corner edge, because they're installing the units from the exterior, so they just press it up against it. These will all kind of interrupt a tape connection or make it a harder tape connection. Particularly at the sills, there can be spray foam coming out, and that needs to be cut back or shaved back, just so it's not interrupting that connection. But you can use a wide piece of tape and just kind of tape over all of that, making sure to tape completely over the straps that are coming inwards. That strap could be an air leak, so we're taping to the window frame, and if that strap comes past it, we're using an additional little piece of tape to air seal over that strap. The other main way that units are mechanically fastened is just directly through the frame's hardware. Then you don't have a strap that you need to tape over. But a lot of these high performance units have straps coming towards the interior that you will need to tape over, and ideally keep that strap edge flush with the substrate and not let it stick out where it could tear a piece of tape. But this is a multifamily project, and they just used a wide piece of the Contiga Solido IQ. This is an old version that came in white. Now it's in black. But this is that fleece tape that doesn't need primer to adhere to masonry, which is great because they had masonry CMU walls. So a really great option, and also that amount of tape could be quite wide. So it's nice that the IQ comes in a wide variety of widths to be able to tape over all those straps and get to the actual substrate, bridging over this rough opening gap that might be filled with some type of insulation. So different type of consideration around multifamily. These projects tend to have rougher job sites, and so I like the IQ a little bit more, especially if we're going to masonry. The main common mistakes that people run into in the field when installing is mainly just that the substrate is not clean. If there's a layer of dust on that substrate, whether it's concrete dust or wood shavings, then the tape would adhere to that dust and not to the actual substrate. So walk around and hit it with your air compressor to make sure it's dust-free, or wipe it down depending on the substrate. The other thing is the tape does need to be pressure activated for the adhesive to set. So make sure you're walking around with that press fix or something similar and really getting into those corners. You can use the edge of the press fix to kind of press into that corner, and then you wipe it on either side to pressure activate that tape's adhesive. I prefer the press fix instead of a roller. The press fix tends to just offer more even pressure when you're applying it, while the roller, I get a little bit worried about the pressure being even throughout the whole roller. Also, a roller is harder to use on an edge or corner condition. The other main concern is just no fish mouse at the seams of the membrane. That's what we're showing on the image on the right here, that there is just a little fold in the membrane, and you need to kind of cut this out or tape over it. Otherwise, there could be an air leak at this fold, or there could be a wrinkle or fold in the tape itself. So it's nice to just kind of hold it taut when you're installing it and place it in. I tend to install it while it's still on the roll. So as I'm unrolling it and pressure activating it, I'm able to kind of pull on that on the roll to keep a taut connection there, and then I'm pressure activating with the press fix as I go. And then I'm a huge fan of pre-construction mock-ups, ideally one with a window install, so you can figure out which tape connections work best for your projects. There is no one right way to do this, but there are wrong ways. And so the pre-construction mock-up is to figure out which option of the right way is the best fit for that specific detail or the specific hands installing it, making sure that they're familiar with the materials. The larger the project is, the more important a pre-construction mock-up is. The most expensive thing is undoing and redoing work. And the best way to prevent that from happening is doing a pre-construction mock-up. And I see a lot of these larger multifamily projects, they're actually building a full cube as the pre-construction mock-up and installing a window in it. That way they can blower door test that cube. And that's a great way to play quality control in terms of that air seal. Big fan of blower door testing. So blower door is a fan that you set up to the shroud. The image on the right, you see this red shroud, and this fan is used to pressurize or depressurize the building envelope. So you can measure literally how airtight the building envelope is on the job site. Oftentimes this is done just as a final check mark to meet code, but I strongly encourage you to use it as a quality control tool. So that way you blower door testing throughout the project while you still have access to that air barrier. So that way you can find that leak and patch it with a piece of tape, or be adjusting the window or door hardware to ensure that it's airtight. There's oftentimes some fine tuning of that on the job site. And to find out more, you can watch this really great James Brown YouTube video. For some reason, James Brown is in a video of him explaining blower door testing. So that's an interesting little relic to check out. But pre-construction mock-ups are a great way to prevent you from having to undo and redo work in the field. And then blower door testing is really the best way to play quality control. This is all about air sealing. For quality control on the exterior side of waterproofing, I find it's best to just hose down the actual window unit and that connection. And I start at the base and slowly work my way up. And I'm pausing for a fair amount of time between hosing, because it could take a while for that water to get in if it's a weak point connection there. So you want to see if that water got in as you're at the sill, and wait a bit and then move up the jamb. And then is water getting in at the jamb? Wait another little bit and move to the header. If you start off with the header, it could run down the jamb and come out at the sill. And then you think your sill is leaking when really there's something else along the way. So start at the bottom and work your way up. And just kind of hosing it and pausing in between is a great way to be playing quality control for that waterproofing on the exterior. But yeah, all of this presentation is kind of rooted in a new blog post series that we have. The first part is all about prepping that rough opening, turning that air barrier and waterproofing into the rough opening so you can get an interior air seal. Part 2 is all about locating the window unit within that rough opening, trying to make sure it's in line with that insulation so you're reducing any thermal bridging. Part 3 that just came out is all about the exterior window taping. There's waterproofing connections on the exterior, and we're soon to release interior air sealing to window frames as part 4 that will be coming out soon. So on our website, we have a really great blog. There's also good case studies and other building science articles. And then we also have the Smart Enclosure ebooks that show a wide variety of construction types, and all of them do include some different options for window install details. There's also just different options for wall assemblies, foundation, roof assemblies, but really want to focus on these transition points. That's where we tend to have higher risk and maybe an air leak or water leak. So, devil's in the details. And when we're looking at window installs, there's a lot of details there. So we really want to be prioritizing that. But check out our blog and check out our ebooks. We service all of US and Canada. They are separate websites you can see at the top there. But please let us know how we can best be supporting your projects. There's folks like me as product consultants with 475 kind of scattered across US and Canada. And we each have our own different territories that we support. And we're oftentimes bouncing assemblies or details back and forth with designers to help talk through options, discuss sequencing. And then for the contractors, we tend to have a similar meeting where we're then discussing different tape options and the staging and sequencing for the install. And then we can also be supporting with takeoffs in terms of their window tapes or air barriers or house wraps, and then set them up with an estimate as well. So we service all of US and Canada. Check out the 475 website for more. And I'm going to pause for a little bit, see what questions we have. But I do have a wide variety of different window install details from our ebooks if there's certain assemblies that we want to be talking through.
Well, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour. We know a lot of people need to jump. We're going to stick around for a little bit longer and just get through some questions and some of these details. Like Nick was just saying, feel free to download the Smart Enclosure. If you fill out the form, it'll send you an email with the download links for all of the different Smart Enclosure guides. Those will come in PDF form or in CAD form. You can literally drag and drop details into your plans. Highly recommend that, and you can follow along. These are going to be a little hard to see the details in some of this, so you could do that right now if you're on a bigger screen and expand that as we're talking through them. So as you're jumping into this, Nick, I've been following along with a bunch of the questions here. As you can imagine, a lot of them center around drainage, the lower end of the window, taping the bottom part of the window, taping and that you addressed that the bottom flange, things like that. You addressed that a little bit, but I would say it's worth repeating. It's because it's our biggest question that we always get through this. So maybe highlighting something along those lines. I also saw questions about masonry and retrofit situations, and I know that you did cover that as well, but those are the ones that we got the most questions about. So I thought let's start with those two there and take it away.
Yeah, first speaking to taping that exterior sill flange, a lot of flange units aren't that high performing. They tend to be from US manufacturers that are still kind of playing catch up to European manufacturers. If they ask you not to do that from a warranty standpoint, then don't do it. Don't tape that exterior sill flange. If you have any bulk water intrusion concerns, then do not tape that exterior sill flange. You want to allow weepage there. We're comfortable taping the exterior sill flange if it is a high performance unit with a low U value located in the middle of the insulation. You're just greatly reducing the amount of condensation that will occur at that sill. So we're comfortable drying through diffusion to handle condensation, but that will not address a bulk water leak. So if you have bulk water concerns, do not tape that sill flange, allow weepage, still tape the headers and jambs to help prevent most of the bulk water. But if there's water coming in at the actual window frame itself, then yeah, make sure you're allowing weepage there. Still get an air seal on the interior side, especially since if you're not taping that exterior sill, you have an air leak there. So also just per code, you need to air seal on the interior side of your window units. So if you have bulk water, don't tape that exterior sill flange. If it's just some condensation, then I think we're comfortable taping that because we have vapor permeable tape, so it can still dry through diffusion. And in terms of masonry assemblies, here's one where we have a CMU block wall as our structure. They're insulating with a 2x4 end board of that with mineral wool insulation. And then they have a small amount of exterior insulation and then the brick facade that has a drainage plane between that exterior insulation and the facade. A big thing to highlight for these reserve brick cladding projects is that there will be brick shelves, and that is interrupting your drainage plane and venting. So you want to be allowing weepage at that top header location. Oftentimes the bricks have little holes in the base to allow the weepage there. But yeah, we're still just taping to that fluid applied, most likely waterproofing over that CMU, and then getting an interior air seal connection on the interior side to that Intello membrane. For metal framing, this is a metal framed on the interior, a pretty thick layer of mineral wool outboard of that, and then that same reserved cladding brick, just for that brick facade. Again, we're turning that Intello in to get an interior air seal to the window frame. At the header, if you have this type of header bit, this will be a little encores piece a little sill flashing tape because we could have a standing water on that horizontal surface, but we are still actually taping to the window frame on the exterior side as well. And you notice that that finished sill is brought all the way towards the exterior here. And then, yeah, this is more of metal framing, but for the historic masonry, this is now the exterior is on the left side, interior on the right. We're oftentimes just doing that caulk connection at the sill, but at the jambs and headers on the exterior, we can oftentimes conceal that tape with a brick mold. So that's kind of based on what your landmarks or historic status is allowing for that. But there's actually a really good YouTube video of Ken Levinson from 475 talking through this specific historic masonry window install. There's a different video of him just talking through the typical historic masonry wall assembly. And another question that I see that came up recently from Haley is asking about a zip sheathing that is the air barrier and waterproofing for a lot of projects. So for zip sheathing, my main concern with zip is really just that I can't shiplap the waterproofing seams, that we're relying on a tape connection for every seam and for covering every fastener head, whether it's a tape or liquid. And just from basic waterproofing standpoint, I really like to shiplap my seams. It makes me feel good. It's easier to play quality control. It's rare that I see a zip sheathing installed properly. Every fastener head has to be perfectly flush with the waterproofing fluid applied or tape connection, and then also at all the seams. The standard zip is just OSB with an air barrier fluid applied waterproofing to it. There, the OSB could be a problematic vapor permeability if you're in really northern climates. But my main issue is just waterproofing. The air tightness on zip isn't nearly as airtight as the Proclima membranes or tapes. The Proclima membranes and tapes are incredibly airtight, incredibly watertight. You can use the same membrane for the wall and the roof. They're all kind of rated at this very stringent and extreme testing standards. So you're just not quite getting that same level of performance out of the zip sheathing. The Zip R, where it has the polyiso built in, my concern then is the vapor permeability of that board. Once that polyiso is applied, it will be much, much lower of a vapor permeability. And also, I like to insulate outboard of my sheathing to keep that sheathing warm and dry. While Zip R, the sheathing's on the exterior side, which isn't great. We want to insulate outboard of our sheathing. I see another question about doing the bow tie first. The bow tie being, sorry, I'm going back here. You can bow tie first. I don't have a big issue with that, but it's just kind of harder to play quality control to know if it was that center of the bow tie was in the right location. So if this bow tie was behind everything, that is fine. The adhero can lap over it, but just make sure that it's this corner that you're paying attention to, that there's not a water leak or an air leak at this little corner. But if that bow tie was done first, that's fine. Just double check that that hole is still sealed.
We had a
I
few good
see.
comments at some point, people talking about different ways that they slope their sills, talking about cutting studs under the windowsill at 5 degrees to get that automatic slope, or tapering siding on the sill. But yeah, good comments and questions. I didn't see any other questions that we hadn't covered.
Yeah, so I would say either slope the sill or back dam. You don't necessarily need to do both. So the back damming is meaning this little lip, and so that if any condensation occurs here, it will drain outwards and not inwards. But yeah, slope sill is fantastic. That's even promoting that drainage even more. So yeah, cutting the cripples that are supporting that sill at a small degree, that's a great option. Big fan of slope sills. That becomes even more important when your sill is really deep. So if you're doing like double stud construction and your windows in the middle of that assembly, you could have quite a deep sill on the exterior side. And then I really want to be promoting that drainage. So the deeper the sill, the more I'd be, focusing on creating that pitch. If it's just a 2x4 or 2x6, I think a back dam is appropriate. And I see another question of what is the best tape product to use at stone or masonry, and that is the Contiga Solido IQ tape. So this is our fleece covered tape that doesn't need primer for adhering to masonry. It comes in a double-sided or single-sided version, and the single-sided comes up to about 11 3/4 of an inch wide. So big wide variety of options there. And yeah, this tape doesn't need primer for adhering to masonry. Really great window tape. The IQD can also be used at those header connections as I was showing to the Mento. But I love this tape for the wall to foundation connection. I'm oftentimes pre-taping from the sheathing to that foundation. So that way my house wrap overlaps all of that. Then I can do another piece of tape to air seal there. Or you can use the IQD tape at that location. So you pull that release strip and adhere it to the back side of your house wrap. And I believe 475's Instagram has a video showing that as well.
All right. Well, we'll be following up. Thank you all for registering. And like I said, we're definitely going to be doing more on this topic. We had a, a last minute burst of a whole bunch of people register. So clearly, a lot of people wanting to know, better ways for high performance window installs. Thanks all for joining, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.